There's a word Paul uses in this verse. One word. And for about 400 years, the English Bible rendered it with a verb that has almost completely fallen out of the language. Commendeth. Which sounds like nothing. It sounds like a flourish. Then you open the Greek, and the verb is a courtroom verb. The sentence was never sentimental. Romans 5, verse 8. Most people know this one by heart. But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. It shows up on sympathy cards, youth group walls, on the inside of a wedding bulletin somebody thought was fitting and wasn't sure why. Paul is not writing a card. He's writing to a congregation in Nero's Rome. Mixed, Jewish and Gentile, recently reunited after the expulsion under Claudius had emptied the synagogues and the Gentile believers ran things while the Jewish ones were gone. The reunion was awkward. The empire was tightening. And Paul is somewhere in chapter 5, which is the hinge of the whole letter, the part where the courtroom verdict of chapters 1 through 4 becomes a pastoral weapon for believers who are starting to suspect grace has an expiration date. He's not trying to convert anyone here. He's trying to keep people who already believe from quietly recollapsing grace back into merit the second month of believing it. So, the verb, Sunistēsin. Paul uses it again later in the letter in chapter 16 when he introduces Phoebe. He says, I commend to you our sister Phoebe. Same verb. The word is what you do when you hand someone a sealed letter of recommendation. It's what you do when you certify a weight at a market. It's what a notary stamps on a document to prove it's real. So Paul isn't telling the Romans that God has feelings for them. He's telling them God is producing evidence.
And the King James reached for the only verb English had that carried any of the legal weight. Commendeth. And the translators of the 1600s were not wrong. They were trying. The problem is that commendeth has aged out of the language, and the translations that replaced it reached for something softer. Shows. Most Bibles on shelves right now say shows. And shows is fine. Shows is also what you say about a stain on a shirt. The shift from commendeth to shows lost the courtroom. The NIV went with demonstrates, and demonstrates is closer, but even demonstrates leans toward the visual, like a teacher at a whiteboard. The Greek is doing something stricter. It's producing standing evidence, ongoing standing evidence, present tense, active, indicative. It's still on the docket, which matters because it changes what you do when you cannot feel God's love. Most of us were formed, quietly, on the instinct that when the feeling of being loved disappears, the thing itself has disappeared with it. And so we go looking. We read another chapter. We try to remanufacture warmth. We audit the last 3 days for what we did to cool it. Paul's verb makes that pointless. Not wrong. Pointless. He does not say, feel my love. He says, here is the evidence. The feeling may follow. The feeling may not. The verdict is not the feeling. And the evidence he names is one specific historical moment with one specific grammatical feature most people miss.
The participle, in Greek, it's onton. It's part of the phrase hamartolon onton haimon, while we were being sinners, is present tense, not aorist. Aorist would mean the death came after we had been sinners, past completed. Present means the death came during, simultaneous. The hostility and the death share the same clock. If Paul had used an aorist there, the whole gospel silently tilts. It becomes a reaction to a turning, which makes grace a reward for repentance, which makes the whole thing merit again with extra steps. He didn't. He used a present participle. The timing is the doctrine. And the reason I trust Paul is not doing something novel with that timing, bear with me for a minute, because this is worth the detour, is that Isaiah saw it first, 7 centuries earlier. Isaiah 53. You've heard the verses. Pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. What the English doesn't put on a sweatshirt is the clause right after. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way. That's present tense in the Hebrew too, in its own way. The sheep are still wandering when the iniquity is laid on the servant. The straying and the absorption happen on the same clock. The servant doesn't wait for the sheep to turn around. He absorbs the penalty of sheep actively heading the other direction. Isaiah wrote that timing into the canon 600 years before a Roman audience needed to hear it. And Paul is not inventing a new doctrine in chapter 5. He's naming what Isaiah already spelled out, just without the servant's name yet, and pulling the pronoun us wider than Isaiah's first audience imagined it could stretch. The atonement's shape was pre-specified. The present participle in Romans 5 is the Greek fingerprint of a Hebrew pattern that was already load-bearing. I don't want what that verse is offering. I think that's exactly the point.
I don't want a love that was transacted before I improved. Because if it was transacted before I improved, then my improvements don't secure it, and my failures don't threaten it. And I have been running a private economy for a long time where my failures threaten it constantly. That economy has given me a lot of motion. It's felt like seriousness. It's felt like taking God seriously. And Paul is dismantling it with one verb tense. You got an email last spring. You still haven't answered. It sat in the drafts folder for 11 weeks. You opened it most evenings after work, stared at it for about 40 seconds, and closed the laptop without typing. It was from someone you love. They weren't asking you for anything. They were checking on you. And the reason you couldn't write back wasn't that you didn't know what to say. It was that you had convinced yourself, somewhere around the 3rd week, that you now owed them a reply proportional to how long you'd made them wait. A short reply would expose the silence. A long one would feel like overcompensation. So you did nothing. And the nothing compounded. And the nothing started to feel like who you are to them now. By week 8, you were drafting apologies in your head while brushing your teeth. By week 10, you'd started avoiding the places you might run into a mutual friend because the first question might be, how's so-and-so? And you didn't want to be the person who didn't know. That's the shape. That's the exact shape the merit economy takes in a real evening at a desk. The longer the gap, the more you owe, the less you can produce, the more you hide. And the part of you that believes you should be praying again, but you haven't in a while, that part is running the same algorithm. I have been quiet too long to speak normally now. The next thing I say has to compensate. I'll wait until I have something worth bringing.
Paul's answer to the algorithm is not try harder. It's not feel worse. It's chronological. The cross happened at a worse moment than this one. The drafts folder is not older than the verdict. The second scenario is slower. It's the stretch of the year you already know. Late January into February. The holiday's gone. The calendar looks empty. You took down the tree a few weekends ago, and the living room looks larger than you remembered, and not in a good way. There's a resolution you made on the 1st that you've already stopped trying to keep. The light goes at 4:30. You drive home in the dark, and the
car smells like old coffee. And you notice, somewhere around the exit ramp, that you haven't thought about God in a specific way in about 3 weeks. Not denied him, just drifted. And you become aware of the drift only because something small happens. The radio plays a hymn in a grocery commercial. Or you pass a church you used to go to. And the first thing you feel is not longing, it's shame. A small, tidy, automatic shame. The shame of someone who thinks the clock is running against them. The shame has a script. I'll get back to it next week. I'll start Monday. I'll read something first and then pray, so I have something to work from. All of which are reasonable. All of which are also the merit economy, hiding inside a productivity frame. The point is not to get more organized before approaching. The point is that the approach does not depend on the organization. The verse says, the clock is not the thing. The verdict is older than the drift. The demonstration was certified at a moment objectively worse than 3 weeks of forgetting. You are not coming back to a love that cooled while you were away. You are coming back to a verdict that never stopped being read aloud.
I'm not saying the drift doesn't matter. Paul will spend 3 more chapters on what obedience looks like in the life of the justified. But he refuses to let obedience function as the warrant for love. Assurance does not rest on the recent record. It rests on a moment older than any recent record can reach. There's a last thing worth sitting with. The verse right before this one, verse 7. Paul lays down the ceiling of what the Greco-Roman world could imagine. One will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. That's the high water mark of the ancient moral imagination. Friend, benefactor, someone of demonstrable worth. Verse 8 shatters it. The object of the love is not the benefactor. The object is the enemy. In Roman legal categories, there was no slot for love that moved toward the actively hostile. It wasn't rare. It was incoherent. A love like that didn't read as love. It read as confusion. The audience that first heard this letter felt that as a small shock. We have 2,000 years of familiarity absorbing the impact. If you want to recover any of what they heard, ask what group you currently find morally beyond the pale. And then imagine the deity of your moral universe arranging a substitutionary death on their behalf while they were still in that condition. That's the sentence. That's what Paul's first readers heard when the letter was read aloud in someone's house in Rome. And that's what the word Sunistēsin was certifying. Not an emotion. A verdict. Produced at the moment the audience's own moral category said no verdict like this could exist. The word was never a flourish. It was the evidence